All of which brings us to today, the 21st century. If I were to ask one of you, how are you feeling? You wouldn't say, well, with my fingers. You might say, I feel happy or sad or joyous. But I'd like to look at it as though Jesus were talking to us today in our 21st century understanding of ourselves and talking to us about our psychological health. Today, we think of someone experiencing schizophrenia as having difficulty connecting their perception of reality with our perception of reality. And they often react to their own perception of reality rather than our perception of reality. In other words, his or her house is divided. But sometimes we too struggle to keep our house together. Now, in my case, I knew I shouldn't drink, but I continued to do so for many years. Now, back then, my house was divided. For others, maybe a relationship isn't going the way we want it to go. We think someone ought to be doing it this way, but they disappoint us by doing it another way, their way. Maybe that's it. We think we should be going this way in our life, but we end up going that way in our life. For some, there's a division between who we think society says we should be and who we feel we are. Like maybe someone is attracted to people of the same sex, but society says that's not right. He would feel outside of society's house. Sometimes it's a division between our insides and our outsides. You know, when I was a therapist at the Los Angeles LGBT Center, I worked with men who internalized the homophobic hatred in society. And they hated themselves. They hated who they were. Their internal house was divided. And then there are people who are born female, but always feel like they're male, despite what their body looks like. Their house is definitely divided. But sometimes our family home is divided. Sometimes a woman feels threatened, attacked in her own home by her partner. And yet outside the home, her friends tell her, everyone tells her, oh, he's such a nice guy. You're so lucky to be with him. Even within her own home, her house is divided. Sometimes a relative keeps sending us wild conspiracy emails, and we spend long hours explaining logically, rationally, why these are simply not true. Why won't she listen to us? Why won't she listen to the truth? Well, maybe we're not listening to each other. Maybe we're in just different rooms of our house, and our house is divided, so we can't even hear each other. Now, all of us, at some time or another, experience times when our own house seems to be split apart, and we can't seem to hold it together. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave us when we find our house divided? Well, we could assume that we've been taken over by Beelzebub and go look for an exorcist, although these days they're kind of hard to find. So maybe we ought to look elsewhere. Now, we're in a faith community, so we can turn for answers to what Jesus might tell us, how Jesus might help pull our house back together. What should we do? Well, for one, we can tell the truth. So often we hear Jesus telling the truth when it would be so easy to ignore it. He went out of his way to talk to the Samaritan woman at the well. He didn't have to. He could have simply ignored her, gotten his own water, which was what he was supposed to do. That's what the tradition was. That's what society told him to do. But no, he spoke to her. He broke the barrier that kept the house of Israel divided. In today's passage, it would have been so easy for Jesus to embrace his family and his mother and brothers, and of course, they knew he loved them. It would be easy to say, they're my family. But instead, he looked around at those seated in the circle around him and he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother, my sister, and my mother. That answer told the larger truth and brought everyone into the unified house of God. We can also listen for the truth. Be quiet. Listen to who you are. Now, my clients heard the loud homophobic voices of society telling them that they were bad, evil, instead of listening to their own voice. In therapy, we taught them to listen to who they were. But sometimes we need others to tell us who we are. When the woman washed Jesus' feet with that expensive oil and her tears, the Pharisees criticized her. But Jesus announced to the crowd that her sins were forgiven and that she was welcome, as the men were welcome at the feast, that she was just like the men. And sometimes we need to be silent and listen to God tell us who we are, as Jesus did at the Jordan River when God said to him, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Now, we may not hear God breaking through the heavens talking to us so loud that everyone around us can hear. But in our silence, we can hear God telling us who we truly are and that we are all in God's undivided house. So, when you feel like your inner spiritual house is divided, it's broken apart, take a long breath. Quiet all the noise around you. Quiet your mind and listen so you can hear the voice of God telling you the truth. Amen.